Welcome to Jesus Changes Everything, a daily podcast dedicated to providing a fresh look at the ancient and glorious truth that Jesus not only reigns, but is busy about the business of bringing all things under subjection, that celebrates the wonder and the glory that he has been given all authority in heaven and on earth. It's Tuesday, and we wouldn't want to flaunt or push back against tradition, and so we're going to have an ism segment. Today's ism segment is on Bohemianism. Bohemianism, Bohemianism, and this is one of those isms that we're covering because I get to be the one that makes the decision because I'm in charge. And I thought I would like to know more about this. I've heard this word. I've heard people described as Bohemians, and I had some idea of what that meant. It was kind of vague, but I thought it would really help me to understand the etymology of the word to come to a better understanding of what it means. When you think of Bohemian, you think of someone who tends to be kind of artistic, tends to be somewhat countercultural. You might think of beatniks from back in the 50s and 60s, which were sort of, in some ways, sort of forerunners to hippies. These are folks that go against the flow. And again, typically tend to live a lifestyle where they're with other bohemians. Maybe the best illustration, maybe the best kind of bohemian subculture that I could think of would be people back in the day that used to follow the Grateful Dead around, and I think people now follow Fish around. I don't know if Fish is still even a band, and don't know much about them, but I think people do that kind of Grateful Dead thing with Fish. Maybe the Dave Matthews Band as well. I don't know. Anyway, these are people who are in the tie-dye, and they're selling their beaded bracelets and dried flowers, and that's what Bohemians are. I thought, well, what does that have to do with Bohemia? Bohemia is a region that is either in the Czech Republic or what used to be Czechoslovakia. And the reason the term comes to describe these kind of typically Western either American or European folks is because it connects to that region because it was, among other places, that was one region from which many of the Romani came from. The Romani is the more polite term for what we typically mean by gypsy. The Romani are a real people who lived and live to a degree a particular kind of lifestyle that was countercultural, that was slightly less sophisticated, a little bit more simple, and so they were called Bohemians because of that, and that's how the word sort of migrated into describing these kind of Western artistic folk. So that's the origin of it, and that's how we make sense of it. There is a increasing sense in which it's getting more and more difficult to be Bohemian because the ideology that would tend to go with being Bohemian is becoming more and more prevalent and predominant. It's kind of like when rock and roll went corporate. It sort of left rebellion behind because the rebellion won. In the same way with the Bohemians, this kind of loose, non-moral lifestyle, I guess, has become more and more prevalent in our own day, such that it is widely accepted. So bohemians are more likely to be admired for being bohemians than they are to be rejected or judged for being bohemian. And you know, I get that. There's something attractive about it, that sort of freedom and looseness and lack of chains, if you will. There tends to be a real back and forth and ebb and flow. Anthony Burgess covered this amazingly well in his novel A Clockwork Orange, which of course became a Stanley Kubrick movie. This ebb and flow between this phase of culture where things are much more permissive and broad-minded, and this can lead to sort of moral anarchy, and so the response is typically something much more stifling and restrictive, and it goes back and forth. So you think typically it's, for instance, in the United States, that of the 50s is a time of the sort of the company man, the rise of suburbia, and then the 60s, this kind of rebellion against that, and this embracing more of a romantic view of what it means to be human. So you go back and forth between a mechanistic view and a romantic view. Well, the bohemians are going to tend to be on the romantic side of things, and when you compare it to the worst element of conformity, it has appeal. So that's bohemianism, not something that I'm embracing by any stretch of the imagination, but I understand what the appeal is. It's bad enough that we are such suckers for the bait and switch. The devil has been playing this gag on us for millennia. We should have learned by now. When the angel comes along and says, you know, God is love, and what he wants you to do is to love one another, the devil doesn't show up on the other shoulder and say, love, that's for suckers. What you really need to do is some good hating. He's not that dumb. Instead, he shows up on our shoulder and says, of course, I want nothing more than for you to love everyone. Love is my favorite thing as well. Why, just the other day I was composing a haiku about love. Let's see here. How did that go? Love one another. If your lover is not there, love the one you're with. He fills God's words with his meanings, and because we miss the switch, we end up tied in knots. What is worse, however, is that he sometimes comes along and actually gets us to substitute a whole different word for the good one. He switches not just the meaning, but the word itself. Nice, though some have called it the cardinal evangelical virtue, is not, I'm afraid, a command from the Bible. God never said, whatever else you do, be nice. Instead, it is a command from the culture. There's only one thing required to be nice, and only one sin against niceness in the culture. You certainly never have to go out of your way and be a neighbor to anyone. You never have to make personal sacrifices of any sort. All you have to do is repeat the mantra of the age. If that's the way you see it, that's fine. See how non-threatening that is? It allows both of us to keep our pride, to keep our convictions, to keep our sins. And it costs so little. In short, to be nice is always and only to embrace relativism. Once you've swallowed this one, Nothing else will ever get caught in your throat. Well, actually, you're only halfway home. You have to study the other half of the nice rule book, the side they only talk about when they have to. You see, there is one thing that still must stick in your craw. That, of course, is when some blamed fool refuses to play nice, to abide by the rules. When someone says, it doesn't matter how I see it, or how you see it, or how a billion Chinese see it. What matters is how God sees it, because He is the one who determines reality. Our job is to get our perceptions in line with His, which are of necessity true. And all perceptions which do not match His are of necessity false. You won't be considered nice if you respond to such a person with a polite, if that's the way you see it, that's fine. Here, according to the devil, and he ought to know, the correct and only nice response is, crucify him. If you can call all those who don't abide by the nice rules of relativism mullahs and terrorists and Nazis and threats to our way of life, and fanatics who must be hunted down like rabid dogs, then you earn the most coveted of sobriquets, nice. It's not enough to be relatively relativist. You must be absolutely relativist. It's not enough to have some humility about your or my convictions. You must arrogantly assume that all convictions by their very nature must be false. As a nice relativist, you must be absolutely certain that any and all absolutists must be stopped, no matter what the cost. Otherwise, you may as well be a fellow traveler with those who just aren't nice. It's important for us to remember this the next time we feel the sting of the accusation that we somehow aren't nice. The answer isn't to protest, to get out our relativist credentials and show how up-to-date they are. Our response the next time some syndicated columnist tries to connect the dots between us and bin Laden is to say, if the objection is that both of us affirm objective truth, objective right and wrong, we're flat guilty. If the reason, friends, Islam is hated is not because it's false, but because it simply claims to be true, we ought to be in a panic that we as Christians aren't the most hated group on the planet. If the powers that be insist on hanging all those who reject relativism, then our calling is to charge the gallows, not to tear them down, but to place our own necks in the noose of the not nice. We can't play nice with those who define niceness this way. We cannot keep both their rules and the rules of Him whom we say we serve. When Jesus said, if you confess me before men, He didn't mean standing up at some flagpole and saying, this is what Jesus means to me. When Jesus said, blessed are you when they revile and persecute you and say all kinds of evil against you falsely for my sake, He didn't mean that we should do everything we can do to change their word, nice, into one that we can affirm and act upon. He didn't mean that we should tone down His exclusive claims so that we can wear our nice pins to the nice meetings. He meant we will be blessed when they throw us out. If we will serve Him, our goal ought never to be that when we are gone they say of us, you know, that so-and-so sure was nice. The epitaph we should seek for our grave marker should be faithful. Instead, what needs to be buried is the virtue they call nice, that the name of Christ might live. You've been listening to the Jesus Changes Everything podcast, a production of Dunamis Fellowship, the teaching outreach of Dr. R.C. Sproul Jr. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we encourage you to subscribe, which you can do at all the usual outlets, to tell your friends, and to spread the word. To learn more about the work of Dunamis Fellowship, please visit rcsproulJR.com. And join us next time on Jesus Changes Everything.